Here's the first problem you have to solve. There are 6 problems you have to solve. The first is the influence of the pain or pleasure of the behavior itself. You and I know this one. We know it's more fun to eat dessert than not eat dessert. That's why we eat dessert. Chocolate is yummy. It's pleasurable. Not eating chocolate is painful for some of us. And so the first problem we've got to solve is that many of the positive behaviors you and I are trying to foster are boring, frightening, uncomfortable, painful. So if you're asking somebody to go out and greet and deal with customers, that takes more energy and effort. It just isn't fun. The contrary problem is that many bad behaviors feel pretty good. So that's what you're up against. And the question we put to you is, if you're trying to create good hand hygiene in a hospital or great customer service in a restaurant chain, how do you compensate for that? How do you compensate for the fact that people just don't want to do it? And the very problem we have, the very reason you and I fail at influence is because we do what I just described. We compensate. We don't solve the problem, we compensate for the problem. So what do influencers do? They understand that you and I spend most of our lives morally disengaged. We're unconscious of the profound moral and human implications of our actions. Why does AIDS spread itself? Because in the moment that people act in a way that propagates that virus, they're unconscious of the moral implications of that choice. The question for us as influencers is how do you make them conscious of that? You see the sign on the right, "Don't vote, it only encourages them." Captures the spirit of cynicism, a lack of motivation to get engaged in democracy. If you want to have greater influence over people's personal motivation, you need to help connect them with the human consequences of the behavior you're after. And one of the best ways to do that is by telling stories. You see the picture on the right? Anyone remember where that's from? Yeah, this is Iraq. And what have these women just done? Yeah, they voted. And they're risking their lives by showing a purple-stained finger in public. Think about how different that is from "don't vote, it only encourages them." The same exact behavior can have an entirely different moral sensibility. The question is, how do you endow it with that? How do you create that? If it's hand-washing behavior in a hospital, how do you help that feel like a sacred duty rather than as a trivial distraction from what I'm here to do? Influencers help make undesirable behaviors meaningful by connecting them with human consequences. You want more influence? Tell more stories. Tell potent stories that dramatize the human consequences of the behavior you're trying to foster. So that's one source of influence and one way to start thinking about it. But one problem you have to solve is if people just don't want to do it, your job is to find a way to help them awaken to how important that is. But here's the second question. The second problem you've got to solve is the influence of skill. Now, this one's remarkable. It's remarkable because you and I almost never assume it's needed. You go to a restaurant organization and you tell people to treat customers well and greet them when they walk in the door. That ought to do it, right? That ought to do it. Or in a hospital, you want people to wash their hands. How hard is that? It turns out that many vital behaviors are far more physically and emotionally challenging than you and I realize. And so you and I grossly underinvest in skill building. You want to create a world-class culture? Skill building is an enormous component of that. Let me just give you one illustration of how easy it is to overlook the influence of skill. Let's take this for example. A behavior that most of us would argue is entirely motivational. What does it take to overcome powerful impulses? So getting myself to not eat something that I know I probably shouldn't. That's all about willpower, right? Well, have a look at an interesting study that my son did for a science fair project a few years ago.
Over 40 years ago, the legendary psychologist Walter Mischel did an experiment with 4-year-olds that changed the world. He put little kids in front of a marshmallow and told them that if they didn't eat it until he got back, he would give them the second marshmallow. Then he left. For 15 minutes. Needless to say, not many of the kids made it. But then he followed the kids that did for 20 years. It turned out that the kids who could delay gratification did better in almost every area of life. They scored hundreds of points higher on their SAT tests, they had better relationships, and they got promoted more often. Michel found that willpower is a big deal. But at the time, he forgot the most important question. That's where Albert Bandura and I come in. Here's my experiment. I wanted to find out if you can learn willpower. In other words, is will a skill? First, I brought 14 4-year-olds into a room and made them Michel's offer. Okay, do you like marshmallows? Okay, this is for you. But I'm gonna leave the room for a little while, and when I get back, if this is still here, I'm gonna give you another marshmallow. Remember, you can eat it whenever you want, but if it's still there when I get back, I'm gonna give you another one, and you'll have 2 to eat. Then I watched them to see how many could wait for the second yummy treat. Just like in Michel's experiment, some made it. Okay, let's go for Jimmy. But most didn't. Then I took the second group of 14 and tried something different. I tried to teach them a skill for delaying. I reassured them it was okay if they ate the marshmallow, but then I made some suggestions if they wanted to wait for the second one. Something you can do to help yourself wait is to not look at the marshmallow. Think of your favorite story that your mom or dad has read you, or you can play a game with yourself in the room. Then I watched them. Look at the clever things they did. The results? 50% more kids made it when given advice about how to delay. So what's the point? Willpower has a huge influence on our ability to achieve what we want in life. No big surprise there. But for those of us who are feeling weak and out of control, never forget what these 4-year-olds teach us. You're never too young or too old to learn the skills to increase will.